When it comes to incredible stories, this one surely deserves a mention. Because, perhaps, such incidents are worth knowing worldwide. This incident took place in Italy in 1939. Leonarda Chanchulli, a soap trader from Correggio, offered her fragrant goods to the townspeople and treated them to homemade cookies. However, the ingredients of these products were somewhat peculiar, but this became known much later. Leonarda Chanchulli was born on November 14, 1893, in Montella, a city in the Italian province of Avellino. From an early age, the girl suffered from a lack of maternal love. Her mother, Emilia, truly did not love her, as she was the result of violence. Therefore, most of the time, she treated her poorly and even beat her. The thing was that every time the mother looked at her daughter, she was reminded of the reason for her marriage to a man she did not love. At a very young age, Leonarda twice attempted suicide to escape the abuse and beatings that had become unbearable for her. In 1914, after meeting a young man named Raphael Pansardi, a postal worker, the girl decided to marry him. Above all, she wanted to leave her parental home, so she did not hesitate for a moment in her decision. However, her parents were against this marriage, as they planned to marry their daughter to her cousin. After Leonarda's wedding, her mother was so angry with her that she cursed her for the rest of her days. Leonarda pretended not to care and settled with her husband in the small town of Loria in Alta Irpinia. It seemed that everything was fine in the couple's life, but just a few years after the wedding, Raphael started drinking heavily. The desperate need for money led Leonarda to prison, where she was incarcerated for fraud. But even after years, the family's situation did not improve. In 1930, a powerful earthquake with a magnitude of 6.7 struck the Italian region, resulting in significant human losses and mass destruction of buildings. Leonarda's house was also affected by the earthquake, and the family, left homeless, moved back to Correggio. Leonarda exhibited a strange obsession with motherhood. Perhaps childhood traumas were the reason she managed to endure 17 pregnancies, although 13 children did not survive. 10 of them died in the first months of life, and the other 3 she could not bear. As a result, only 4 children survived, and Leonarda excessively cared for them, wanting to protect them from her mother's curse. A fortune teller she consulted to learn about her future said that she saw prison in her right hand and a psychiatric hospital in her left. Leonarda mentioned that every night she dreamt of little white coffins, one after another being consumed by the earth. Unable to bear the loss of another child, she began reading books on palmistry, astronomy, spells, curses, and spirituality. Meanwhile, Leonarda's husband's alcohol problems became even more noticeable. With barely enough to feed the family, the couple constantly argued, and eventually, they decided to divorce. Severing ties with her husband, Leonarda moved to the 3rd floor of a building on Via Cover Avenue along with her 4 children. Despite the ill omens her mother talked about, she managed to change the course of her life and opened a small shop. It seemed that luck was finally on Leonarda's side. She successfully traded in old clothes and soap and even practiced cartomancy, as she had been fascinated with studying the occult and black magic from an early age. Leonarda's friendly and accommodating nature earned her great respect in the community. Her family seemed perfectly normal. 4 children excelled in school and had numerous friends. Despite her divorce from her husband, Leonarda never prevented him from seeing the children. Additionally, she enjoyed inviting her neighbors over for tea and dessert. Everything drastically changed when one of Leonarda's sons, Giuseppe, her favorite, decided to join the Italian army during World War II. From that moment, the woman was restless with worry. Her son's departure instilled in her an immense sense of longing and fear. Her superstitious nature led her to convince herself that it was time to help herself by turning to occult arts. Thus, Leonarda devised a chillingly eerie plan involving human sacrifices to protect the young man from any harm. To realize her ideas, Leonarda used tarot cards. This was the perfect way to capture the attention of her victims. At some point, Leonarda realized that she wouldn't need to search for and summon future victims to her home, as her 3 friends constantly came to her. These lonely and middle-aged women sought comfort and advice from Leonarda. Among the three friends were Francesca Clementina Suavi, an unmarried woman who worked as a babysitter for local children, Virginia Cocipo, a former opera singer who had traveled to various parts of the world and established a certain reputation, and Armelinda Faustina Setti, a semi-literate rural woman with a submissive but whimsical character. All three regularly met at Leonarda's house, where they chatted for hours on end. The fear of losing her son compelled Leonarda to act immediately. She made the decision to carry out her plan before it was too late and she could never see her beloved son again. The first victim, Armelinda Faustina Setti, perished at the hands of Leonarda on December 17, 1939. In their final conversations, Leonarda predicted an upcoming marriage for her friend. And so, one day, Armelinda visited Leonarda, and no one saw her again. The day before, Armelinda Faustina Setti had asked a neighbor if she could take care of her cats for a few days, as she needed to leave. The cards laid out by Leonarda promised the woman a meeting with the love of her life. On December 17th, she took great care in grooming herself. Armelinda styled her hair elaborately, applied makeup, and doused herself in perfume. She seemed excited. She couldn't help but confide in some acquaintances that she was getting married and moving to a town in southern Italy. The last time the residents of Correggio saw her was when she entered Leonarda's house. Once inside, she disappeared. However, her disappearance did not raise suspicions, as many thought she had likely left to meet her newfound love and had visited her best friend to bid farewell. In reality, though, everything was entirely different. Leonarda convinced her friend that she would meet her future husband in the town of Pulla, claiming that this man was a close friend of hers who supposedly dreamed of meeting Armelinda. Seizing the opportunity, Leonarda promised to take care of her property during her absence and coerced her into signing a notarized letter stating that Leonarda would manage her savings. Leonarda urged Armelinda not to tell anyone to avoid gossip and misfortune. However, she advised her to write letters to her friend so that, as soon as she left, her friend could deliver a message on her behalf. Additionally, Leonarda mentioned that she would appreciate it if Armelinda could come by to bid her farewell the day before her departure. When Leonarda met Armelinda at the door, she appeared happy and well-dressed. The hostess offered her guest a glass of wine, which she had mixed with a sedative. Once Armelinda fell asleep, Leonarda dragged her into a small room, took an axe, and chopped her body into 9 pieces. Afterward, she took 2 pre-prepared basins, placed the body fragments in them, and then filled a pot with water, which she had bought specifically for soap making, and set it on the fire to boil. She then added 7 kilograms of caustic soda and the body parts to the pot. Leonarda stirred the mixture until the body fragments dissolved and turned dark. She poured the resulting composition into buckets to let it settle. Surveying the mixture, Leonarda thought for a moment and said, "Now we have enough soap for half a year." As for the victim's blood, Leonarda waited for it to clot, then placed it in the oven to dry. The criminal then mixed this ingredient with flour, added sugar, chocolate, milk, and eggs. She thoroughly mixed everything and baked crispy cookies, which she distributed to her next guests, as well as ate herself and shared with her children. Armelinda's disappearance went unnoticed. Neighbors remembered that she was planning to move to Pulla, and since she wasn't married, no one searched for her or suspected anything was amiss. Everything was proceeding as usual, but 9 months later, on September 5, 1940, Leonarda decided to repeat her plan and claim another victim. This time, it was Francesca Clementina Suavi. Shortly before the next murder, Leonarda predicted to her friend that she would soon leave Correggio to take the position of director at a boarding school in Piancetico, as her friend was ready to take her as a replacement. Just like the first time, Leonarda advised her second victim not to share the good news with anyone to avoid jinxing it. Instead, she recommended sending postcards to her family, explaining that she had to leave due to getting a position in Piancetico. This time, Leonarda also offered her candidacy as the manager of her friend's property and responsible for selling it if necessary. The rest of the plan followed the same pattern. Francesca visited Leonarda to bid farewell, drank wine laced with a sedative, then the criminal killed her, dismembered her, and incorporated her into the beloved cookies. Francesca Clementina's disappearance didn't raise any suspicions, as all her acquaintances knew that she had found a good job and hadn't had a chance to say goodbye. The only thing she entrusted to Leonarda was her savings. 2 months later, on November 30th, 1940, when Leonarda believed that her sacrificial offerings were yielding results, she decided to carry out her plan for the third time. This time, her victim of choice was the 59-year-old soprano, Virginia Cocipo. According to the cards, Virginia's fate was about to change. Leonarda informed her that the theater manager in Florence was in need of a secretary with knowledge of the singing field. Supposedly, he was willing to offer the position to Virginia. Leonarda then asked her friend not to tell anyone about this, just as she had done in the previous 2 cases. However, the future victim immediately shared the wonderful news with her closest friends. At noon on November 30th, Leonarda opened the door of her home to Virginia. Little did she know that at that moment, Virginia's future daughter-in-law was watching as she entered the house and never emerged again. Everything was done in the same way as the previous 2 times. Except now, Leonarda acted with much greater expertise. She not only threw the dismembered body into the boiling cauldron, but also added a bottle of cologne. The aroma emanating from the concoction was splendid. After several hours, Leonarda managed to create excellent soap with a creamy texture. She then returned to preparing her desserts, which were so popular and delicious that those who had the chance to taste them described them as masterpieces. Leonarda claimed that these were her signature recipes. A few days later, Leonarda began distributing pieces of her soap to her neighbors, as well as treating them to her famous cookies. The woman took pride in the recognition from the town's residents, who saw her as a kind-hearted woman always ready to help. Meanwhile, the sudden disappearance of Virginia's future daughter-in-law, Albertina Fontini, began to worry her. There wasn't even an address where she could be found, and this seemed odd to Albertina because her relative usually acted very differently. As a result, she decided to officially report the woman's disappearance to the police chief of Correggio. During questioning, Albertina Fontini mentioned that the last time she saw Virginia, she had visited Leonarda Chanchulli. Subsequent investigations revealed that 2 other friends of Leonarda had also vanished without a trace. Further searches unveiled the nuances of this criminal incident, which were not only astonishing but also sent collective horror throughout the district. In essence, all the townspeople had unknowingly consumed Leonarda's cookies and bathed with soap that contained the remains of Leonarda's victims. A search of Leonarda's house led the police to discover valuables and other belongings of the 3 victims hidden beneath a brick layer. Additionally, they found dental prosthetics belonging to the 3 women. In the room, they located 3 axes, several knives, and a cauldron in which the criminal submerged bodies to create soap. All these tools and artifacts are currently on display in the Criminological Museum in Rome. Seeing that she was cornered, Leonarda confessed to her crimes, revealing the sequence of her actions, which began with convincing her victims of a bright future in the form of a desired job or love. Once the victims fell into her trap, they were willing to leave all their belongings to Leonarda. Then she would treat them to a glass of wine laced with a sleeping potion. As the women fell asleep, Leonarda would take an axe and kill them, then proceed to dismember the bodies in a tub, later to be used for making soap. She would also bake her desserts using the victims' blood. After the search, investigators contacted the 2 men that Clementina and Virginia were planning to travel with, suspecting them to be part of a criminal group. However, further investigation ruled them out, as they were completely unaware of any wrongdoing. Leonarda's son was also arrested for alleged complicity in the crime, as the police found it hard to believe that she acted alone. After spending 5 years in prison awaiting trial, her son Giuseppe was released due to lack of evidence. Leonarda attempted to convince the jurors that her son had no involvement in the crime and that all responsibility lay on her. She was taken to the morgue to exclude her son from the case and prove that she alone was implicated in the crime. Incredibly, it took only 12 minutes for the autopsy of Leonarda's body. The trial began on June 12, 1946. During the trial, Leonarda tried to justify her actions by claiming that she was paying a blood tribute in memory of her deceased mother. Her mother appeared to her in dreams and threatened to take the lives of her children if she didn't sacrifice the innocent lives of others in return. At one point, a forensic expert stated that Leonarda would not have been able to turn her victims' bodies into soap. To this, Leonarda stood up and said, "If anyone present brings me a body of any age, I'll easily prove it." A few days after the trial, Leonarda was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in the women's psychiatric prison of Popeswali, where she died of a stroke on October 15, 1970, at the age of 77. During her life and after her death, numerous books were published about her case, with the most famous being The Confession of a Bitter Soul. Leonarda earned the nickname the Soapmaker of Correggio. This is an impressive case. No one could have anticipated that a woman known by all as a good person could commit such deeds and even involve the entire district, making people eat cookies and wash themselves with soap containing the bodies of her victims.